So we're going to have Kaz come up and tell his story.
Silence, please.
My name is Casimiro Torres. My Irish mother called me Casey, but these days people call me Kaz. My mother had 9 kids from 3 different fathers. Mine, I never really knew him. I knew he was from Puerto Rico and he was in the Navy, but that's about it. My mother tried, but she was an alcoholic. My house was where all the junkies, thieves, and gangsters hung out. When I was 5, and my brother Nino was 6, the guys that hung out my house, they would make a ring. They'd put us into it and make us fight. We had to fight until one of us was hurt, or just bloody enough. And the men would bet on us, like a dog fight. Afterwards, we'd take care of whatever cuts and bruises we had and sleep on a mattress in the back room. All of that drinking and drugs around my house, that was the norm. People OD'd, had knife fights, ambulance and cop cars were constantly in my house. My mother hardly noticed. When I was 6, the 6 youngest of us were taken away from her. We were taken to an institution upstate New York where we were immediately separated. As we were leaving, my mother gave me a St. Christopher medal. She told me it would protect me. As she was walking away, I took it off and threw it on the ground. I was angry. They weren't taking us away, she was throwing us away. We were taken to a cottage called 11 Hayden. Now at home with my mother, we were raised with no structure and no discipline. But 11 Hayden was run by strict discipline and obedience. When we arrived, I was greeted with a smack that sent me across the room because I said I wanted to go home. I was 6 years old and I had already experienced a lot of fear, but I was about to learn about fear on a whole new level. As it happened, I spent my entire childhood in places like 11 Hayden. From time to time, I was sent back to live with my mother. But before too long, things would fall apart and we'd be back in 11 Hayden or someplace worse. 11 Hayden had 3 counselors, 2 women and 1 man. All 3 were abusive psychos. If we ate too slow, we were punished with a beating. To this day, I find it impossible to eat slowly. They'd wake us up in the middle of the night. They'd make me hold 2 gallons of bleach while I'm squatting. They'd make me sit cross-legged under a desk in a dark room for hours, just waiting for them to decide my punishment. Usually a few punches, a few slaps, or they slam me into a few walls. Sometimes it was worse. But they had their own clinic there. Once I spent an entire winter in that clinic. When the time came for me to go back, naturally I didn't want to go back, but I didn't have a choice. They sent me back anyway. Just about anything abusive a person can do to a child, I experienced at some point. When I was 10 years old, I was introduced to alcohol and weed. And from then on, that's how I handled my pain. By the time I was 15, it was all about getting high. Alcohol, acid, and weed. At this point, my mother was in a hospital somewhere, and I had run away from an institution, and I was living in an abandoned building in Brooklyn. And I was tired. Tired of being cold, tired of being hungry, tired of being tired. I made a decision. I decided to commit suicide. I had been raised to believe suicide is a sin that sends you to hell. But at that point in my life, I figured, how much worse can hell be? So I took a bunch of pills, and the next thing I know, I wake up strapped to a bed with tubes hanging out of me. I had been in a coma, but I pulled through. A shrink sent me for a 90-day evaluation at Westchester County Psychiatric Center. 9 months later, I was still there. So I stopped taking the Thursine they had been making me take, and together with another kid climbed out a third-floor window using sheets. The kid I was with got caught as soon as we hit the ground. But I ran into the woods, and I didn't look back. I made it to my girlfriend's house in Brooklyn. 2 days later, I was picked up by the cops and brought back to the hospital where I was reevaluated. This time the doctor said I was no longer a danger to myself. Well, maybe it's just not worth the trouble. So I got my brother and we hit the streets. By the time I was 17, I was already involved in hard drugs, mostly cocaine, crack, and heroin. I was running the streets of Hell's Kitchen. I was already well educated in the art of thievery and even robberies to some extent. But my addiction became all-consuming, and I began to carry a gun. One night my brother found me, told me I had to come to my sister's house in Brooklyn because my mother was sick. When I got there, I found out that she was already dead. The next day I saw her in a casket, and I told her I was sorry. Sorry I wasn't a better son. Sorry she had such a hard life. Sorry I didn't make it any easier on her. The day after my mother's funeral, I went on a run that led to my first arrest and my first trip to Rikers Island. When I finished the processing at Rikers, I was put in a dorm with other adolescents, about 100. The dorm was made up of 8 sections, all double bunk, with a wide space referred to as Broadway running up the middle. There was a day room with a TV and a shower bathroom combination, all enclosed in glass, so the COs can see what's going on at all times. Privacy and modesty are things you leave at the gate when you come to jail. The next 20 years of my life was drugs, jails, alcohol, prison. From Hell's Kitchen to Attica. The change comes slowly. In 1995, I met a woman. She was the only person I could ever talk to when I wasn't high. I fell in love. Allie and I moved in together. She became pregnant. In her 8th month, I was rearrested. Because of my record, they gave me 2 to 7.5. So I did another 5 years. During this time, my daughter Cassie was born. And when I returned home, I was a husband and a father with no preparation for either role. But I got a job and I was good at my job. But can you imagine a guy like me come from where I come from, my background, a husband, father, responsibilities? It scared the hell out of me. I ended up back in the streets. One day I was high and sleeping in a park on 23rd Street, Madison Avenue. A guy I knew told me about the Fortune Society. He told me I can get a Metro card there if I had done any time. I figured I'd get this card, sell it, and be that much closer to getting high. But they had other plans for me. I saw a case manager. He offered me something to eat. He told me about this place called the Castle and all the good things they had to offer me. I was just thinking to myself, yeah. Just give me the fucking Metro card. I went back to the park, hit the streets, and got picked up. Sent back to Rikers on a 45-day skid bid. That arrest was July 27, 2005. Something happened on that last trip to Rikers. I can't really explain it. All I can say is I finally had enough. I didn't want to get high anymore. I called my wife and she was there the next day. I could have gone back to her when I was released, but I had made that mistake already. I knew I couldn't go back to her without first learning how. So I went back to Fortune. As fate would have it, I saw the same case manager. Again, he offered me something to eat. Again, he told me about the castle. This time I listened. This time I didn't want a MetroCard. This time I wanted my life. As a kid, and even as an adult sleeping on trains, I always had a book in my back pocket. Reading saw me through a lot of tough times. I owe a lot to Mark Twain, Jack London, Charles Dickens. I stayed at the castle for over a year. Then I began to develop my own plan. I volunteered at the Fortune Society and began school at the resource group to become a substance abuse counselor, using my past life to work with others. But most of all, I wanted to get a job in an apartment and begin my life as a real husband and father. I was hired part-time in the education unit at Fortune. This led to me being hired full-time in the alternative to incarceration unit, working with kids 16 to 17 years old. Kids are going through things I went through more than 30 years ago. Times have changed, but the feelings are the same. I always knew there was something better. I just didn't know how to find it. Fortune helped me with that. I have since reestablished ties with my brothers and sisters. Sometimes I spend weekends at my sister's house out on Long Island. On holidays, when the kids are asleep, we sit out on the porch, talk about our wild, crazy childhoods, trying to make sense of it all. One night I was out there with my sister Eileen. When she turned to me and said, "I have something for you." When she handed it to me, I was amazed at how shiny it still was. I put it on, and I never took it off again. It says, "St. Christopher, protect me."